Hello, everyone, and welcome back to your favorite YouTube channel, the 1138 Nerd Herd. This is a channel where we talk about, review, debate, and discuss comic books, superhero movies, and pop culture in general. And like a recurring nightmare, I am your insufferable host, Cascio Pistachio. Here to get on your nerves, piss you off, and make you flat out hate my guts. With that in mind, we begin part 4 of our 12-part series review of the hit comic book series Black Hammer. Black Hammer is a Dark Horse Comics publication and is written by Jumping Jeff Lemire, drawn by Dangerous Dean Ormston, colored by the scintillating Dave Stewart, and lettered by the clever Todd Klein. The golden age of Spiral City ended when its heroes disappeared. Now those heroes are trapped in a rural farm town, except for Black Hammer, who made an escape attempt and hasn't been seen since. Abraham Slam and Barbalian are trying to blend in with the townsfolk, but Golden Gale won't accept their new reality. Madame Dragonfly and Colonel Weird are each descending deeper into their own strange worlds. Only Talkie-Walkie is intent on escaping the farm, as she tries again and again to contact the outside world. We come in on the telling of Abraham Slam's secret origin story. I wouldn't have drawn the parallel initially, but his is an origin very much like, if not straight up plagiarized, from Captain America. Well, only about 10%. Abe was a scrawny, 98-pound pencil-neck weakling who wanted to serve his country in the Second World War. He gets the bum's rush after striking out with every branch of the U.S. military. He parks his butt on a bench outside the Socklingham Boxing Gym and is met by Punch Socklingham, who wants to know why he's so down in the dumps. Abe tells him he just wants to be left alone, but immediately begins telling his life story. Punch assesses Abe's completely given up, but tells him if he really wants to fight, he's got to learn how to take a few punches. Wow, what profound advice, huh? Past Abe, looking up at this huge, muscular, built brother, and asks him, what do you know about it? Lemire cracks me up. So then we get into more of a Daredevil type origin groove where Socklingham buffs Abe up and trains him up to heavyweight boxing status. If you can believe that. I mean, well, it is a comic book and it is somewhat farcical, so hey, why not? And it is Punch who coins the name Abraham Slam, which, as the sports analogies go, would probably be more fitting of someone trained in wrestling, but what the heck. Black Hammer is so chock full of quirky weirdness and camp, it only seems strange for a moment. And as fate would have it, Punch is in deep with some mobster types who come for their monthly collection. Punch won't have it until next week, but that isn't good enough. So the thugs punch Punch's ticket by shooting him point blank in the chest. Oh my God! What happens next is quite ludicrous as Abe cries out in shock and horror. But they do absolutely nothing. I think they even comment about how there's like a panel, as you can see. They stand there talking about basically we can't have any witnesses, so, obviously they're getting ready to plug Abe as well, but despite the fact that they are armed, they somehow don't bother to use them as Abe launches a physical attack on them. There's like 3 of these guys. Abe is somehow fast enough to take 2 of them out with 1 punch each. And I guess for the sake of convenience or expedience, Lemire decided that Abe has become so strong and fast under the tutelage of the late great Punch Socklingham that the strength behind his punch on the second guy is so staggeringly powerful that he flies back into the third guy and he's knocked out simply by the force of impact. Wow, that really tells a tale of how strong Abraham Slam was back then. A single punch knocking out 2 hefty grown men? Yeah, that's strong, man. Either way, it would be highly unlikely Abe would even get 1 punch in on these guys, let alone be able to beat all 3 of them unconscious, when they're all carrying guns. I mean, this sequence and this aspect of Abraham Slam's origin is utterly and totally ridiculous, but also really funny. It's so wildly campy, it's hilarious. I mean, because if Abe is trained to be stronger than he was and can fight as well as he does, wouldn't it be more fitting if Sock were able to accomplish the same thing Abe did after he was shot? Or better yet, both Abe and Punch could have started wailing on these guys, but eventually one of them gets a shot off and kills Punch. But the way it plays out on the page is absolute nonsense. I just gotta say, I mean, you just look at it to see for yourself. And I know it's a comic book and fiction and all that, but come on, Jeff. You gotta do better than that. It looks like the idea just came to mind and you wrote it as it came to you. No refinement, no rewrite, no nothing. I call bullshit, Jeff Lemire. Bullshit. So, from Slack's dying breath, he tells Abe he's got more heart than anyone he's ever seen, and then encourages him to never stop fighting. Aww, so sad. Really ridiculous. But anyways, as we move on here, Abe's reliving this funny little origin story while doing dishes in present day. Everyone's all at Twitter because he's having Tammy over for dinner that night, and no one seems happy about it. Barbalian in particular is really giving Abe a hard time about it, and it's so much like real family drama. It gets really hilarious as Abe wants to be sure Gail isn't late for dinner, and she blows it off with a whatever, like I care what Titty Tammy Hosebag thinks. Really funny stuff. It caps off with Abe getting on Barbie's case to help out. He says he is by reading War of the Worlds in order to make stimulating conversation with Titty Tammy. Abe, of course, loses it, yelling at Barbalian not to call her that. He corrects himself by telling Abe that I just nipped out. Lemire does have a good sense of humor, I'll give him that. But Barbie figures he's had enough and tells him to relax. Of course, Abe just wants it to go well, and Barbalian tells him he and Gail will be on their best behavior. So what could possibly go wrong? And just then, Colonel Weird pops down from the ceiling. Abe's response, "Oh, sweet Christ, I'm doomed." Barbie snorts. Disentangling himself from the ceiling, Colonel Weird comes down to the floor. Trying to salvage as much of the evening as he can, Abe tries to dissuade Weird from basically being weird, or actually just attending, but Weird is eager to meet Tammy and promises to put on the same routine they always do, with Weird playing his son, Randy. That's an interesting play on names and words, isn't it? But this character isn't like that, so we'll table that. But Abe isn't comfortable with that idea and really tries to persuade Weird not to come at all. He feels he can't trust him since he hasn't really been himself lately. But Weird gets it and tells him he won't have to worry about being embarrassed by him and drifts away. Abe starts to explain, but really doesn't seem to try all that hard to stop him from going. Barbalian gives him a look. Abe feigns cluelessness, but Barbalian tells him he knows he was too hard on Weird. Abe's only excuse is that, well, tough love never hurt anyone, but Barbalian ain't buying it. Down in the basement laundry room, Gail is searching through a basket of laundry, but then eyes a box in the corner and selects an article from it. Holding it up to her nose, she inhales the scent of the person who owns it. As she exhales, she whispers the word, Barbie. So here we have more indication that Golden Gael has a thing for Barbalian. But as noted earlier, we've seen the seeds being planted for a potential romance between Barbalian and the new pastor in town, Father Quinn. And this is a loaded setup of possible love triangle between Barbalian, Golden Gael, and Father Quinn. And it's easy to see what type of complications could arise from either aspect of the characters involved. This is real touchy considering Gail's predicament, being an adult woman trapped in the body of a 9-year-old child. And come to think of it, Could this be why, when she and Barbalian were brooding on the barn roof, talking about what they missed about their former lives, she told him she missed having tits? Was that Gale's kind of inverted, retroactive way of flirting with Barbalian? I mean, it's really weird and awkward to begin with, and it's not like she's going to regain access to her adult physical body and her tits anytime soon, so I don't know what a comment like that would really do for informing Barbalian of Gale's interest in him. I guess I just mentioned that, though, because it's a bit of a funny aside, I guess. I mean, this whole book is just a hilarious comical romp. I mean, Jeff Lemire, as a writer, I got to hand it to you, man. I mean, I've got some criticisms here, but considering this is a 12-part series I'm doing, you've obviously won me over a long time ago. So whatever criticisms I have, definitely take them with a grain of salt. Even though he is an alien being, which is why I think she might be looking in his direction, it's more than likely he knows her true age and physical nature. And if they remain in this place indefinitely, he might not find it so awkward and strange to have a romance with Gale. Interesting setup, to say the least. We'll have to keep an eye on what develops. Later that night, the time is drawing near, and Talkie is reminding Abe where the forks go. Of course, what's funny to note is that Ormston's drawing in this panel shows a completely empty dining room table. Still worried over the impression he might make, he hurries Talkie out to the barn. Talkie's response is to pitch a fit over how demeaning it is to have to hide in the barn like some animal. Abe comes back with, "Oh, not you too." Talkie goes into an act of stereotypical robot behavior, saying how he lives only to serve his human masters. And Abe just can't take it. Still later, we get a shot, possibly proving that Abe does still think about his former days as a superhero. Standing in front of a mirror, he remembers trouncing a couple of gun-toting thugs, standing defiantly against someone with temperature-controlling powers. Then the moment has passed, and he lets his guts slump out over his belt. Meanwhile, Colonel Weird pops into the bathroom. Good thing no one was in there. Looks at himself in the mirror, opens the medicine cabinet, and selects a razor. Looking worn out, he slumps down on the rim of the tub and stares intently down at the razor. I would almost say this could have been some kind of setup to make us think Weird might be about to do himself some harm, but I initially took it to mean that even though Abe hurt his feelings earlier, and that even though he'd probably rather not, he intends to shave and be presentable at dinner to prove to Slam that he's not an embarrassment. On page 12, Tammy arrives. Abe is more nervous than Tammy, obviously with good reason, considering this bunch. I guess all the normal-looking members of the family are all supposed to be ready and waiting when Tammy shows up, though the only one on deck is Mark, who greets and welcomes Tammy. So this is a cute, funny scene in that you get that kind of sitcom family setup. And just like in a real family setting, there's going to be some family members acting out in ways they normally don't, just to give their sibling a hard time. In this instance, Mark infers he's been cooking all day and prepping to meet her. Abe, knowing he did no such thing, just sighs. Oh, God. And I love how Mr. Lemire sets this up and rolls each character into it singularly, and not all at once. Next is Golden Gale under her guise as the granddaughter. And of course, in keeping with the merciless ribbing Abe gets, she's dressed in all black. Her face is painted all white like some kind of dead whore. Love that line from The Crow, by the way. Brandon Lee, rest in peace. I don't know who the band is on her shirt, the Black Lamps, but I'm guessing they're supposed to be to represent something that would make Tammy and Abe uncomfortable. Gale plays it to the hilt, with a studded choker, skull earrings, and running mascara. To top it off, she even uses profanity right in front of Tammy. Hilarious. Apparently, this is the first and only time in 10 years the Hammer family, or I think as they're referred to in the actual comic as the Slamsteins, have had a visitor, and so Gale's appearance is totally shocking and one hell of a surprise to Abe. He gets on her for her language and then asks about her wardrobe and makeup. But Gale is milking it for all it's worth and is probably, for the first time in a long time, relishing playing the role of an 8-year-old girl. Dean, man, I gotta say, man, even though your art style is not one I normally gravitate to, I have to give it to Mr. Ormston. Again, the facial expressions on Tammy and Abe's face are absolutely priceless. Abe has damn near lost it and is probably on the verge of some heavy disciplinary action, and Tammy has just fallen in love with Gale. You can tell she thinks she's adorable. What a hoot. All the facial expressions of all the characters are so spot on. I want to give sincere credit to Dean Ormston. This is one of his artistic strengths. Finally, Tammy employs a strategy I think most potential mother figures would use. She tries to relate to Gale. She does so by telling Abe not to overreact and by echoing Gale's sentiment from the top of the scene and using the same profanity Gale did. Man, if she only knew. And imagine her reaction when she finds out who these people really are. Man, I can't wait. I can't wait. This next sequence I'm sure will go down as the funniest in Black Hammer history. So I guess it was time for Jeff to introduce Abe's daughter to Tammy, but with what we witnessed between Dragonfly, Gale, and Slam in issue 2, it makes sense she's an absentee during this auspicious occasion. Tammy asks where his daughter is, and he, not knowing when or if she's going to show, tells her she's under the weather. Okay, real quick, I want to take an aside and point out that when Dragonfly is mentioned, Dean gives us a panel of her in her cabin working a spell surrounded by candles and that consistent eerie green hue that seems to always be there in one pane or another, or panel or another. But it's seen quite a bit since issue 1. I'm not sure what that's about. But also notice that as she's working her mojo, there are these infant corpses milling about. What's going on here? Anyway, but Gale amps it up by adding that her mother is consistently ill and stays in her room a lot. Oh my god, this is so funny. Obviously, this gets a reaction from Tammy, who's concerned about Maddie's health. Maddie being Madame Dragonfly, of course. And Gale just keeps piling it on, insinuating that I guess she guesses her mother's depressed or something because her father, Gabe's son, is never home. Now, seeing as how they've been trapped in this prison for 10 years, it's hard to say exactly how long Abe and Tammy have been seeing one another. I don't think she would have been waiting for him to introduce her to his family for that long. Now, even though I don't know the ins and outs of the development behind this story, even I would have to say that Abe must have begun seeing Tammy sometime over the last 2 years, 2 or 3 years, 18 months, somewhere around there. Also keeping in mind that she's recently divorced from the town sheriff, and considering how hostile he is to the Hammers, or the Slamsteins, it seems like it must have been fairly recent, say like in the last year or so, like I said, maybe 18 months, something like that, but very recent. This part of the narrative falls under the same umbrella as some of the other inconsistencies in the story. While not as bad as Ignited, oh god, it harkens back to Gale's fear of being seen turning into a little girl, and the concern that if she was, she, as her adult self, would be laughed at, and her beau Brock Hansen wouldn't ask her to the prom. None of that really made any sense to me when the obvious superhero solution is so obvious. Just jump in the bushes, or into a phone booth, or just duck out of sight and then change. So that's a part of it too. Lemire establishes that they've been trapped there for 10 years, but then seems to forget to establish the markers that inform us of that. Not just in telling us it's been 10 years, but by giving us examples of incidents and even established relationships that they have instigated or routinely partake in since their arrival. Case in point being Mark and the pastor. What was that, in issue 1 or 2 where he meets the new pastor for the first time? Of course, the pastor being new in town fits, but then I have to consider the idea that Barbalian has only recently developed an interest either in religion or in pursuing his homosexual inclination. I come to the conclusion that for the whole 10 years he's been there, he hasn't had nor expressed any romantic interest or feelings in anyone on the team or in town until the first issue. And that seems, I guess, likely, but somewhat unlikely, considering, I guess, you think about, homosexuals having to come out of the closet. And, I mean, I know nothing about it. I'm a straight black male, so I wouldn't know the pressures of that situation. But, I mean, I guess you could imagine, it might take a while for anybody to come out. And just because it's a thing where people are encouraged to do so, it's like you still, as an individual person, will probably stop and think, well, what if this, what if that, what if, and, that might paralyze you from coming out for who knows how long. So it seems reasonably likely, I guess. Sure. I would imagine that those of the Slamstein family that can and do pass for normal humans, despite them keeping to themselves as much as possible, would at some point develop some loose and casual relationships with some of the other townspeople, the way Abe has. The way it reads, and has read up to this point, is that they've been there for 10 years, but I don't see a woman Tammy's age dating someone for 10 years without having met this guy's family even once. The mystery and suspicion that would probably begin to bubble over within about a year or two, but even that's pushing it. So then the topic turns to Abe's son, or son-in-law, since it's only been established that Dragonfly poses as his daughter. It would only seem logical that his son is his son by marriage, and obviously not biological. I guess as part of their ruse, Abe recites another lie, telling Tammy he's back at their old place, to which Tammy tries to remember where that is. Another punchline comes as Abe and Mark both give different answers. Abe says Saskatchewan and Mark says Montreal. But to cover Abe's farce, Mark makes the correction by saying he then went to the University of Montreal. This is a trip. This is just like a scene from a hit sitcom, and it gets even better when Tammy asks his field of study. Gail again ups the ante by adding that her Uncle Mark studied religion but was expelled for excessive drinking and having an affair with a nun. I have to give it to Lemire. He has a great sense of humor, and he works it well into his stories. I think because of his presentation here, I will make it official that I will give a graded opinion of each of the comics, movies, and whatever else I review here on this channel. So far, Lemire is carrying a strong B or B+, but that's only because we're only most of the way through this issue. I almost feel bad for Abe, but to some degree I think he deserves this merciless ribbing, but it doesn't stop there. Uncle Mark tries to correct Gail's comment, but she cuts him off with, "You told me I always had to tell the truth, remember?" At this point it seems Mark's losing his patience, and very sternly tells her to cut the crap, in so many words. But Gail isn't done just yet, and then turns her antics on Mark by pretending to grow afraid of him. Abe, again, futilely tries to steer the conversation back to less embarrassing things, but Gail is relentless and adds, "But Grandpa, Uncle Mark shouldn't be ashamed. He's almost sober again. And he went back to church yesterday." At that point, Mark can't take it anymore and loses it, telling Gabe to shut up. Of course, Titty Tammy doesn't know what to make of this, and all Abe can do is facepalm and calmly ask both of them to... And at that point, we break into a flashback here to a time when Slam fought a green, oversized, octopus-looking thing called Cthulhu. Lemire's obvious play on the Mexican legend of Chithaluthu. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but I hope you get my meaning. Chithaluthu, as Slam orders him to stop right there. And I'm guessing back in present day, that's exactly what he says to the kids at dinner with Tammy. Well, I think I can see why this series has received the critical and fan acclaim it has. The writing, while a little clunky and unrefined at times, is mostly pretty solid overall. This was a total sitcom moment back there on page 15. Not only is Gale my favorite character on the team, but this has to be one of the funniest written and drawn scenes of any comic book I've ever read, and I have read a lot of comics. During this brief battle with Cthulhu, Lemire gives us an ode to the Silver Age trope of scientists forever being victims of their own mad experiments gone wrong and becoming some murderous criminal amalgamation of man and beast. But Slam doesn't fare too well against Cthulhu and is about to be beaten by him when Kraboom! Lou is knocked on his keister by Black Hammer. He points out that Cthulhu, I don't know, just looking at how it's spelled, it's hard to wrap your tongue around it. Cthulhu was out of his league and that it's no longer the 40s. It's no longer the 1940s. It's now 1979, and the world is in uproar. The type of criminals and thugs he used to face have been replaced by much deadlier villains, and Black Hammer doesn't have time to look out for him. He basically tells him it's time to hang it up and quit the hero biz. So this is our second appearance of Black Hammer in the book named after him, and our first full appearance of Black Hammer since his brief cameo in issue, I believe it was number 1. Could have been 2, though. I'm not sure. I'll have to maybe double check that. So in looking at Black Hammer, we see he's a kind of Thor-inspired character, carrying the big hammer and all, though I would have likened him more to the old folk hero John Henry, but Lemire might be too young or certainly not that into black history or culture to know anything about him. Maybe a lot of people don't, He's dressed in mustard, yellow, and green. Not the coolest color scheme, but by the way Lemire sets up the book and the less than serious, more comical comic book style of the art suggests to me that this outing is a bit on the farcical side, or even played in satire. Yet it maintains a sort of solid through line and narrative. A relatively straightforward dramatic telling with lots of comedic flourishes. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. A relatively straightforward dramatic telling with lots of comedic flourishes. So this past encounter has some echoes in the present with Abe feeling like he can't cut it. He can't manage his teammates who are obviously ribbing him over his infatuation with Townie Tammy, as well as the whole let's just make the best of it mindset he has. Or at least that's how I feel about it anyway. And of course our ace degenerate Gale just won't let up, touching on the subject of Tammy being married, but visiting without her husband. But as we can see, Abe is just burnt at this point. Luckily, Colonel Weird shows up in his guise of Randall, Abe's other son. He quells Gale's obnoxious attitude, telling her to apologize to Mrs. Trueheart. Remember what Weird looks like and where we saw him some pages back. Gale and Abe can't believe how well he's cleaned himself up. He's all crew-cutted and dressed as a Canadian Air Force colonel. This stops Gale in her tracks and she clams up. To top things off, Weird puts on a hell of a show of charm and grace as he toasts their lovely guests, while also showing just a touch or more of flirtation with his father's girlfriend. And here on the last panel, I don't know what was going on with Ormston's pencils here, but Randall's face is a bit elongated, and he's sporting what looks to be double bags under his eyes. He still nails all the facial expressions on a masterful level, but that last shot on page 20 could have used some touching up. Or maybe I just don't get where he's coming from with that. Perhaps the face is elongated because the guy's been wearing a beard since issue number 1. You get used to seeing somebody like that, so anyways. But I want to say that's one demerit for you, Mr. Ormston. Playfully, of course. So they make it through dinner, and Abe walks Tammy out to her car. Abe is tripping all over himself with apologies for his family. But Tammy isn't fazed and has no reason to assume Gale is anything more than an average kid. As they share a goodnight kiss, they are caught in the frame of a pair of binoculars. It's Trueheart, the sheriff. I guess he either heard about or found out about Tammy's date with Abe, and he followed her out there. He's pissed. and plots some kind of revenge on Abe, but doesn't know just what yet. As he's figuring that out, he drives off. Behind him, the dirt road comes to life with a strange-looking protrusion sprouting up out of the ground. Madame Dragonfly materializes and watches Trueheart fade into the distance. And as she's obviously heard his threats, she demonstrates that even though they may all hate her, she's still part of the family, and is prepared to handle the sheriff the same way the sheriff plans on handling Abe. Something of a note here that as Madame Dragonfly comes up out of the ground, Ormston doesn't draw it as if she's digging up through the dirt. It looks more like she's forming up from the dirt, as if she's part of the environment, part of the ground in this world. And all around her and Trueheart is that strange pea soup green coloring. Very muted in some panels on this page, but is nicely blended in with browns and grays. Our boy Dave Stewart working his colorful magic. But Dragonfly is naked. And while, yes, I'm a big fan of the more mature themes in some comics these days, I'm not pointing it out for that reason. But to note that being nude, we can see her skin is, of course, its normal greenish hue, but it also seems dead and decaying, as if she's a zombie or undead something or other. Very much like the trio of zombie babies that were milling around her back on page 14. It's not so much an odd hue as it seems more by design that this color is like this mainstay in this world, at least, and is constant throughout the series thus far. It's almost as if it's part of this world, if you know what I mean. It could be nothing, or it could be everything. Who knows? Spiral City. Now, Lucy Weber has made her way to an observatory perched atop a mountain cliff. She's meeting with Dr. Starr, Jimmy Robinson. And yes, for you astute comic book geeks, and you better be if you're going to be a member of the 1138, this is another ode to the comic book industry, this time in the form of popular and talented writer James Robinson, who popularized a once obscure hero, Starman, for DC Comics. I've never read the series, but I hear it's a highly acclaimed run. Don't believe me? Check it out for yourself, and then come back here, drop us a line, and let us know what you thought about it. Dr. Starr is a semi-retired super guy who was well liked by Lucy's father, Black Hammer. He's backtracked the flight path of the probe that was discovered in issue number 3. With help from NASA, it was confirmed there was nothing out there, but Dr. Starr has access to a cosmic-powered telescope, which naturally can see things NASA can't. And naturally, that means he's found something and lets Lucy take a gander. What she sees, what Starr's telescope has picked up, is a doorway. Dun dun dun! And of course, you know what that means. Yep, you guessed it. To be continued. So, Black Hammer number 4, written by Jeff Lemire, drawn by Dean Ormston, and colored by Dave Stewart. What were your thoughts on this issue? Did you laugh? Did you cry? Were you flat out pissed off about anything? If so, let us know in the comments below. And while you're at it, if you would be so kind as to give us a like, and don't worry about a dislike, we're kind of allergic to those. And if you've really enjoyed this review, feel free to hit that good old subscribe button so that you too will be one of the first notified when the next exciting episode of the 1138 hits the airwaves. Until then, farewell, adios, take care, and have a good read.